Shall we move on then to the 800?
As we approach the end of this 33rd month of 2020, that's about right, isn't it?
Well, yes, going purely on feeling, yep.
Yes. A surprising title sits atop the list of highest grossing films of the year. An increasingly irrelevant statistic, to be sure, but still of some interest, and that's Chinese war film The 800, which recounts the tale of the 452 defenders of the Xihang warehouse in Shanghai in 1937, and their unlikely morale-boosting resistance against the Japanese Imperial Army. That discrepancy in figures is due to the soldier's commanding officer, Zi Jinwan, providing an inflated number to the public in order not to tip off the Japanese to their true strength. Though 800 hardly seems better than 452, compared to a Japanese division of 20,000 that had just helped to send 300,000 other Chinese soldiers into retreat. While I am familiar with the broad sweeps of the Second Sino-Japanese War, I am unfamiliar with this particular event, so everything I know about it I learned from this film, so necessarily have no take at all on its veracity, even if I take a fairly high base level of scepticism into anything produced in China about significant events in Chinese history. Caveat in place, let's return to the action. With Shanghai surrounded and the National Revolutionary Army fleeing with its tail between its legs, a handful of defenders remain in Shanghai, consisting of the 88th Division and a number of other soldiers scraped together from the scattered remains of other divisions, lucky enough not to have been executed for desertion. Setting aside the inherent immorality of executing deserters, especially in a conscripted army, it seems simply stupidly wasteful to kill soldiers when the army needs them as a resource. But, well, the 800 is another war film that neglects to confront this. These defenders, many of them apparently expected to be grateful that their country hasn't executed them and is instead allowing them to die for their country, are holed up in the warehouse, a former bank building with thick walls and stockpiles of food, medicine and ammunition. Situated as it is across the narrow Wusong River from the foreign concessions in Shanghai, it provides both an incredible visual juxtaposition, with the bullet-ridden building flanked on one side by the shelled and smoking ruins of the rest of Shanghai, and on the other by European-style streets and glowing neon marquees. But its proximity also gives the inhabitants of the still pristine and shiny parts of the city the opportunity to watch the various assaults on the stronghold as entertainment, because people are scum. Beyond the unusual setting, though, things are fairly unremarkable, with your standard for the genre mix of scarred and fearless veterans, callow youths who have no place near a battlefield, a coward or two, and an inspiring commander. Oh, and a horse called whatever Mandarin for metaphor, probably. This group must then repel a number of assaults, fight their own fear, etc., etc., etc. I'm not trying to dismiss the events the film depicts, it's just that a lot of it is, well, quite typical fare for a war film. What makes it interesting, for me anyway, is the setting, which I don't know an enormous amount about, nor that war, and I don't think Flowers of War, if either of you remember that, educated me particularly well. And it also has a naivete about the world in general that's uncommon to see depicted, including one former farmer who pleads for a description of the feeling of a woman's breast in the hand, or an officer who doesn't know where Shanghai is on a map. It's just as well the setting and those few scattered experiences were interesting to me, though, as if I'd only been interested in character, I'd be, well, out of luck, as the film more or less forgot to include any. Oops. There are a few faces you'll know under all the muck by the end of the action, but few, if any, rise to the level of character. And that's a pity. It's always difficult to judge performances in a language with which you're unfamiliar, but physically at least, it all seems pretty solid, as opposed to the not infrequent scenes in the area of the foreign concessions in Shanghai, where English is spoken, and generally, truly, truly terribly. Though it may be that the director, Guan Hu, for the same reasons of unfamiliarity, can't discern that. Continuing the international flavour is the presence of Londonderry Air, the tune for Danny Boy, first played by a soldier with a harmonica, and then a Chinese lyrical adaptation sung in both English and Mandarin by Italian tenor Andrea Bocelli and Chinese pop singer Na Ying. Do I have a point attached to that? Nope, not at all. It just struck me and I wanted to mention it and couldn't really think where else to fit it in. So this is where it went. But I'll carry on. Or I won't, as I'm mostly done. As a war film alone, it doesn't particularly stand out. Though it does look good, and I appreciate the practical work, including creating a set with 68 real buildings. What makes it worth checking out, though, is that unfamiliar setting that I mentioned. So you probably should.
The 800, I don't know. I struggle to say I enjoyed it. I suppose on a number of levels I kind of appreciated it. It feels like a fairly standard sort of post-Saving Private Ryan war film in the way that a lot of it's set up and the emotions it's trying to provoke and all that. But it's difficult not to watch this with one eyebrow constantly raised. There's so many prisms in which you're viewing this, particularly the ongoing standoffs between China and Taiwan, which all this is intimately going to be tied into, and various other things that is going on with China at the minute. It's hard to watch this as anything other than blatant propaganda, which, to be fair, pretty much every war film is. So it's not exactly in bad company in that regard, but it's just ultimately not that enjoyable for the reasons you mentioned, as much as the characters are rote and really difficult to get behind and really remember who's who, to be honest, for a lot of it. And the situation, I think you're right, is probably the most interesting thing about it. The contrast between having the untouched and opulent city over the road in this war zone and another makes for a huge striking contrast, and visually and all the production level of it is incredibly high. It's up there with anything that Hollywood could produce, and in that level it's all as good a war film as you could probably expect from the scenario. But I don't know, it's 2.5 hours and it maybe just seems to drag for quite a lot of that. There's only so many ways you can show the same attacks on a one position being repulsed before it gets a little bit samey. I don't know. I didn't hate it, but to be honest, it didn't make an awful lot of impression on me to really tell you one way or the other about it. Yeah, I'm a little conflicted on this one. I don't have any particular reasons to hate it other than just sort of general scepticism of it. But if it does wind up being, for whatever metric, the most successful film this year, it's no worse than many other most successful films of the year. So,
Fast and Furious 7, anyone?
Let's have a Marvel logo in front of us. That's refreshing, I guess.
Yeah, it's probably actually more worthy of your attention and time than anything that from the kind of usual tentpole franchises. So yeah, give it a look in, if nothing else, to broaden your horizons a little bit. But yes, I'm not completely up to date on the history of it, but it's easy to do. I mean, it's a World War II film, and I mean, if Nazis are the kind of villains you could love to hate, then the Japanese in World War II were like the level above of mustache twiddling villainy. So
yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah, it's the Japanese are barely in it though. It's weird that the kind of, and actually I was expecting it to be like particularly anti-Japanese, with like typical Chinese Communist Party saber rattling and that sort of thing, and their fights with Japan over various islands in the South China Sea and stuff. So not just the Taiwan stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on in that region just now. But yeah, the Japanese are barely a character because there's like a one sneak attack by like 5 Japanese soldiers, and that's about the only time, other than the meeting with the Japanese captain later on, that you really see them. But other than that, they're mostly seen as like unseen threats. Like there was faces the Chinese soldiers now in the assaults and a lot of sniper action. Yeah, but they're barely there, and it's like the whole film is just. I enjoyed it. I think more than you did. It certainly, for its length, it's needing more material. What it particularly needs, though, I think, it's hard to understand how with the length it needs character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like so the enemy's not a character, and then the faces you do get to learn, they're not much more than like very quickly sketched caricatures of people rather than characters.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's trying to say more. Like you keep seeing this scene of this woman who's clearly a black marketeer. She runs a casino in the foreign concession. Very kind of androgynously dressed. The sort of thing you might expect to see in like Cabaret, set in like pre-World War II Berlin or something. And you keep seeing her largely in profile. I don't think you see her face at all until right at the end. Like, oh, is this going to be significant or something? Like, oh, no, that went nowhere at all.
Yeah.
It's very strange. Like, oh, she decided that she would stop hoarding the morphine she had for whatever reason and go and use it for people. It's like, is this supposed to be a morality lesson? Like actually, when it comes to the pins, the Chinese people or care about other people. Like, And the same with the guy who's been selling information to the Japanese. Like, I'm not buying that he suddenly came to the side of the right because like people like that are scum. They're not going to have changed like that. Also, it's frustrating because it's interesting because I said don't know much about that war, and that the first time you see the glowing neon lights when the soldiers are walking along the street and hiding from the Japanese and their own soldiers at that point, and then suddenly neon lights, like you don't see that in war films because that doesn't happen in war.
Yes.
It's so strange. So there are some interesting things there. But then it's like, yeah, but I don't care about any of the people.
Yeah.
You forgot to put people in that anybody would be interested in. So kind of frustrating that. I enjoyed it, but it's not brilliant, unfortunately.
I've seen much worse, but yeah, I can't give it a wholehearted recommendation. No,
and it's better than Flowers of War.
Yes.
The sole other film I think I've seen set in this particular war.
The Flowers of War, was that the Christian Bale one?
Yeah, with the like shootout in the church at the end, set just before the siege of Nanjing, I think.
Yeah.